The presidency has confirmed that President Cyril Ramaphosa would send an envoy to the US to discuss South Africa's position regarding Russia. This comes as a warrant of arrest was issued by the International Criminal Court for Russia's President Vladimir Putin on grounds of alleged war crimes. For more on this and its implications, we are joined by research associate at the African Center for the Study of the United States at Wits University, Gideon Chitanga. Gideon, good evening to you and welcome. Our envoys are going there to engage and to persuade their counterparts on South Africa's stance on Russia. How do you expect they will frame this, given our country's stance on the country hosting its foreign minister, recently hosting joint maritime exercises?
Thank you, and good evening to your viewers. I think that we have to put this situation in a bigger context. So the ICC decision and its implications, potentially that South Africa would be obliged to arrest President Putin if you were to attend the BRICS meeting in August here in South Africa, given that it's signed to the ICC. I think that there is a bigger context which is probably more relevant, and the ICC situation with respect to the arrest of President Putin is just one event, but that is related to bigger events. So, in my view, the appointment of an envoy then becomes very important in the sense that the West, in broader terms, and the US in particular, the European Union and its member countries, they view South Africa in the context of, I think, African countries and their response, especially or particularly the sense that they have looked to be ambivalent in terms of criticizing Russia over the conflict in Ukraine. The second thing is the broader aspect of changing geopolitical relations. And I think what is in the West of the African position, which they view to be very closer to Russia and very much in line with the expanding role of China, not only in Africa but in the continent. And given that context, you would actually understand that South Africa is in a difficult position, not only as a government or a country, but a country that is viewed as a major player in global affairs in terms of representing African voices and the African position. And for the South African government to dispatch an envoy, I think the issues will go beyond just addressing concerns about the ICC and how South Africa will respond to the expectation to arrest President Putin, to discuss the broader foreign policy and African diplomacy, obviously specifically including South African diplomacy, and where it's heading to in terms of building beneficial relations, not only with Western countries, the US and the European Union, but also consolidating on beneficial relations for South Africa and for Africa with Russia and with China.
Gideon, let's stay on this idea of the deeper, broader context, including some of those very important geopolitical points that you raise. And we could probably add to that South Africa's position on South-South solidarity, our own independence, and critically what's termed progressive internationalism. Do you think that Western countries, and we'll get to the economic stakes in a moment, which are really quite high for South Africa in terms of AGOA, do you think that Western countries understand that countries like ours would want to, chart their own course in the world, which might include, friends that they're not friends with?
And my apologies for saying this, but I think that there is a bit of historical amnesia which has pervaded Western policies up to this point in terms of understanding the position of African countries. If you think about it from the concept of providing aid, pushing for a democratization agenda that is mainly based on the provisions for civil liberties, human rights, and humanitarianism, without adequately coming up with interventions that addresses the socio-economic conditions and the broader economic needs of Africans. So if you consider the European Union, for example, it has been for more than 100 years the major player in African politics during the colonial era and the post-colonial era. But unfortunately, a lot of opportunities were missed in the sense of crafting a very objective agenda, but choosing to maintain a biased outlook towards Africa. And at the moment, we discuss in the academic space, and I think there is that a sense of realization in the US and probably the European Union, because you start to see a pattern that is emerging that the Western powers should be reconsidering their processes and going back to look at critical economic conditions in Africa in a way that Africans understand their situations and listen to Africans in terms of working with them to address these problems. So I'm emphasizing this because I think this is the missing point, and I think that there isn't that much interest within the Western institutions and power brokers to say, let's listen to Africans, let's talk to African political leaders, let's engage African academics, let's understand the conditions of Africa from Africans. And this idea of sending an envoy, I think it's informed with this increased the sense that Africa is in a state where it seeks to exercise its own political and economic agents and views other countries as partners. Africa is not going to choose one country over the other, but it's going to cooperate with the USA, the EU, China, and Russia. And in that context, advance peaceful diplomacy. And I think that what other people call neutrality, I would view it as a possibility for African countries to robustly advocate for peace in Ukraine and try to exercise their connection, ability to relate to Russia and Ukraine as well to influence a dialogue, a process of dialogue.
Gideon, given and what you say echoes Naledi Pandor of DIRCO's sentiments in terms of that course that South Africa wants to chart on its own. But you mentioned something important, which is the deafness of Western society to listen to a multiplicity of voices in countries, the independence of thought that they have and how they want to formulate their relationships and the basis for how they will do that. Given these things together and the fact that a lot is at stake, including our 400 billion rand, AGOA trade agreements with the United States, how do you think, if you were advising this envoy, and we're not quite sure yet who it's going to be, how would you advise them to design that important conversation? And very quickly, Gideon, we're almost out of time.
Yes, I think that obviously it's a multi-level conversation that is needed between African actors and Western actors, US actors. So there's a layer that should focus on political leaders and try to influence the policy making. So if they're engaging with the US, I think the target would be the legislators as well as the executive. But there are also other layers, civil society, think tanks, academics, including the younger people, because I think the US in particular is quite inside looking, and there is need for a total shift, because we seem to be irreversibly drifting towards a multipolar society, and relations should be redefined from a perspective of one power dominating the rest of the world to seeking terms of engagement that are totally different, that accept views from different parts of the world.
Gideon Chitanga, thank you for your time and your analysis tonight. We appreciate it. Gideon is the research associate at the African Center for the Study of the United States, based at Wits University.